Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. How are my people? How are my people out there in the Christmas season? Merry Christmas, everybody. I think it's in 2 or 3 days. I don't even know what day Christmas is on. I've been working so hard, I hadn't put a video up in about 6 or 7 days. But I got a great one for you right now. I mean, a really, really good one. When you hear me introduce this story, you're going to hear me say, hey, the last story in this set, blah, blah, blah. I had planned on putting this in a marathon with 3 or 4 other stories, but after I recorded it, I discovered it's like 25 minutes long. It would make the video too long, so I'm going to break it out in a video all by itself. All that said, I think you're going to love it. It's one of my favorites so far, one of my absolute favorite stories that I've read. I just absolutely love this story, and I think you will too. So I'm going to quit talking. We're going to do the intro, some good music, and then we're going to tell an awesome Bigfoot story. All right, here we go. This last story it's kind of long, but it is really, really good. And the guy who wrote it did a good job in conveying his feelings and his observations on what went on. This encounter took place in West Tennessee, close to where I live, and I think it's awesome, and I hope you enjoy it. He doesn't want his name revealed, and you're about to find out why. So I'm not going to tell you his name. I'm just going to tell you his story, which is all he wants me to do. And he writes, when this encounter occurred, I was 18 years old. The year was 1978. It was the strangest and most exciting thing that has ever happened to me. After the event, I told everyone I knew. I was excited to tell everyone what happened to me. I spent 2 days looking up anyone and everyone I knew to tell them this story, and I actually thought that they would believe me. How could I have been so wrong and so stupid to think anyone would believe this story? I was laughed at and ridiculed by my friends, and I was put off by family. It was humiliating. My parents even tried to get me to see a psychiatrist. I'm now 58 years old. My wife knows about the encounter, and so do my 4 children who are now grown, but it was not I who told them. They found out by hearing it from others in my family so they could get a laugh at me. It has been a joke since I was 18. I just smile and act like it's an everyday thing. They ask me about it now, but I will not say a word. I just tell my kids and my wife that it's an old joke and it's not really that funny. Within 3 days of trying my best to tell this story, I stopped and have never mentioned it again until now. Why now? Because I like the way you run this website, Cam. It's the way you treat people. No one in my family or circle of friends then and now will ever hear this. They don't follow this topic on the internet. I have to follow these encounter stories in secret, by the way. In a way, it's my shameful, adulterous affair with the unknown. I'm telling it again now so that the world knows that these creatures are very much real and alive in our world. Every word I write here is real. It all happened exactly as I'm about to tell it. A friend invited me to deer hunt on his property his family owned in Chester County in West Tennessee. At the time, I had a Chrysler-built Jeep CJ5 with all the cool lift kits and upgrades available to off-roaders at the time. I had the meanest tires you could buy mounted on that Jeep. They were buckshot Q78s. I thought I could go anywhere in this vehicle. I had run the Jeep mostly in muddy terrain and had never gotten stuck other than the one time down at the old Allen steam plant on the Mississippi River close to Memphis. The caked, dry-looking gumbo mud of the low river bottom had fooled me, and I actually almost lost the whole Jeep. If I had not been lucky to get it pulled out, it would have been swallowed in the gumbo forever, like quicksand was portrayed in the old Tarzan movies. I'm spending a little time describing my Jeep because my overconfidence in this Jeep is what put me in the most harrowing experience of my life. I was young and dumb, and I thought I could do anything and go anywhere in that vehicle. Maybe some of the men who hear this will remember how we were. Pretty much bulletproof if you can remember back that far. We met at the gate on the farm early that cold December morning, and we made a plan. There were 3 of us, and the fellow whose family who owned the property showed us on a scribbled map onto a sheet of notebook paper where the stands were that we could use. Off we went into the darkness of the winter morning. I got to my stand just as the sun was lighting the eastern sky. I climbed in and settled down with great anticipation of killing a good buck. I'd never killed a buck at this point in my young life, so I was ready, and I was in the right place to kill one. The morning creeped by, and soon it was close to noon. I had not even seen a doe, and it was a bit discouraging. There were not as many deer then as there are now, so that was not unexpected. This was the time we had all agreed that we would meet back at the vehicles and have some lunch. I climbed down and walked a mile or so back, and I met with my buddies. We ate and drank and talked about the morning, and I was ready to get back out in the woods. The other 2 guys with me were bored. It was easy to see. They acted like they wanted to get back home to watch a bowl game, but I knew they just wanted to go home. I asked if I could hang around and hunt the afternoon. Killing a good deer was on my mind. They both said that was fine, and they gave me directions on how to get back out to the highway, which was different than the way that we had come in. They told me it would cut 15 or 20 minutes off my time back home. No big deal. I memorized the route, we said goodbye, and I marched back to the stand I had occupied earlier. I distinctly remember the sound of their truck fading away in the distance and the woods getting quiet. It was perfect. I had this whole place to myself, and being somewhat of an introvert, I love the feeling of being alone, especially in the woods. I climbed back into the stand with the same anticipation that I had had earlier. Even if I didn't kill, I was just happy to be there. The afternoon crept by. I think I fell asleep once or twice. Later in the day, 2 small does stepped into the clearing that I was overlooking. But I didn't kill one. It was late. I didn't really know where I was, and dragging an 80-pound deer back to my Jeep would take 2 hours. I wanted to get out of there before the sun went out completely, so I passed on the does, and I just watched them munch on some grass. The day was a bust, and I figured I had 30 minutes to get started home before it was completely dark. When I got to the Jeep, it was dark. No matter, I had directions to get out of there a faster way. I cranked the Jeep and headed in that direction. My friend, who had hunted this place since he was a kid, acted like he knew these roads well. I made all the turns that he described to me, and things were going good. I felt like I would hit the main 2-lane highway any time. The last right I was to take looked fine as I started down the last gravel road, but soon it became hard to drive on. It narrowed down to just the width of my tread, and I could see banks on each side of the road coming up. Some people call them sunken roads. What they are is old logging roads that are sometimes abandoned after the timber is extracted. These roads are not maintained by the counties. In heavy rains, they wash out even deeper, and I was navigating deep ruts and my Jeep was tilting over more than I was comfortable with. But still, I was moving forward. It was not a big deal. Just follow this road 5 or 6 miles, and I would hit the blacktop. Of course, I hit a stretch in the road that I knew I could not get past. The ruts and washed-out sections were too deep. I stopped, and I thought I would just turn around and go back, but I was between 2 banks on each side of the road, and there was no way to turn the Jeep around. I could have tried to back out the road, but it was hard enough to get where I now sat going forward. No place to go now but straight ahead. I squeezed out of the door with barely enough room between my Jeep and the red clay bank to get to the front hubs, and I locked them in. I dropped the transfer case into low gear, and I started creeping along. Within 100 yards, there was a washed out spot that I knew that I could not make, but I had no choice, so I creeped into the dry gullies, hoping for the best. One spot was so washed out that the Jeep was almost at a 45-degree angle, and I felt the vehicle tump over onto my side, and then it stopped. Had the bank not been there to catch the roll bar, I would have tipped over on the side. I was stuck. It was now around 8 p.m. It was dark and cold, and I was stuck in the middle of where? I don't know. I had no idea where I was. But I did know that the highway was ahead. I climbed out of the passenger side with my heavy mag light, and I started walking. At this point, I had no idea how I was going to get my Jeep out of there, but I would worry about that later. I just needed to get to the highway, catch a ride, and get to a phone and call for some help. The night was cold and clear. The moon was full, and if I had been up above these sunken banks, I could have seen for several yards in the woods with no light. The moon was to my left like a torch in the sky. The bank and the trees on the right side of the road were lit well, and on the left side and ahead of me was shadowed by the deep bank on the left. I'm glad I had that big mag light. I would not have known where I was stepping, and I could have broken a leg or something. High up on the left, all the trees were silhouettes with the moon behind them. To my left, I heard something walking in the leaves. It was loud. It scared the hell out of me because who expects to hear that on a cold, frosty night in the woods? Then it sounded like something joined whatever I had initially heard. I stopped and listened to the footfalls. They were heavy and deliberate. So I shouted out, hey, my truck is stuck back there. Can you help me? I assumed it was a man walking in the woods. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear something breathing like a horse just above the bank. It was right there. My rifle was strapped to my back, and I fumbled with the flashlight, and I dropped it, trying to get my rifle in my hands. The flashlight tumbled down the hill that I was descending at the time and landed in a position so that the beam of the light was pointing straight at me. I was illuminated in the darkness. Brilliant and just my luck. Whoever was up there would at least see that I had a rifle pointed in his direction. But then nothing happened. All went quiet. My mind went to the movie Deliverance, and I wondered if some locals were messing with me, or maybe they had other plans for me. My fear went sky high. I have a big imagination, and it was getting the best of me. A minute or two passed with no noise, so I walked down the hill a few steps, and I picked up my mag light, and I started walking again with my light scanning the top of the banks on both sides. I heard the leaves rustling again to my left and behind me. Swinging my light in that direction quickly, I caught the outline of a figure of a man peering over the top, but as my light swung shaking to lock onto that spot, I saw it withdraw and vanish. There was more activity above, and it was moving ahead of me now. They were going to wait on me to walk past and kill me, or so I thought. I was terrified, and so far this had been the scariest thing that I had gone through. I know it's scary because I was there, but what I'm about to tell you creeps into the unbelievable. By the way, I never got this far in the story with anyone that I told in the days after this event. I heard and I felt a strange hum come from above me, like a hum from an electrical transformer at your house, but it was much deeper. And then my light went out, and I swear I felt the hairs on my head get static, and the pores on my face began to open, and I began to sweat. I cannot remember ever having this sensation before or since. I stopped and just stood still in the middle of that narrow road. In a minute, my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and my surroundings began to clear up. I could see with the moonlight. By now the moon had crested the left bank, and it was shining right in my face. Standing 10 feet above me on that bank and a little to my forward was the silhouette of the biggest monster I have ever seen. No details were clear with the moon at its back, but I could clearly see and hear its heavy breathing and its size and shape. I started walking. What else could I do? Every step I took towards that highway got me closer to safety. I wish I had known how close I really was. I think it would have given me a bit of hope. As things stood now, in my mind, I was a walking dead man. Whatever this thing was, it would soon descend into the hole and it would kill me. But it didn't do that. It walked with me stride for stride. My eyes were locked onto this thing as I moved down the road. So much so that I fell once walking over one of the ruts in the road, dropping my useless light. I could not find it, and so I just kept walking. My rifle was back in its position on my back, and I never reached for it. I don't know why. Maybe because this thing was so big that I doubted my little 30-30 lever action would do the thing any damage. If that wasn't enough, a second creature the same size stepped on the bank to my right, and it watched as I passed, and then it started tracking with me, but in the rear. Then another in front of me on my right, then another to my left, and soon there were 6 creatures that I could see clearly in the moonlit night. They never made a sound, sans their footsteps in the leaves and their heavy horse-type breathing. At one point on the left, I could see steam coming off the largest monster's back and shoulders. Again, I could not see details of their appearance, only the outlines for the ones on the left and a little more detail of the escorts on my right. They were covered in thick hair. My neck was strained. I kept looking back and forth, then rear to front, trying my best to keep an eye on all 6. The road ahead appeared to get more shallow. The banks were receding, and soon I would be level with the forest floor. In one way, it was a relief. It gave me options on a way to escape. But on the other hand, I didn't feel like I was going to get out of this. So elated with feelings of this thing being over one way or another, I hurried my steps towards the place where the road was not sunken. As we all approached this spot in the road, the creature started fanning out and moving away from the edge of the banks that would soon be gone. When I could see into the woods on both sides, they had moved a distance away from me. I could still see them surrounding me. They just stood there watching and stood there staring. What was next? Is there something that I should be doing? I looked at every one of them over about a minute, maybe to make sure that one was not rushing me. I don't really know, but I looked at every one of them. My fear was subsiding and my fascination was beginning to grow. I felt strangely calm in that place in that time. It was a calmness I had never felt. The 30-degree weather wasn't on my mind. I felt a warmth that was not physical, but rather it was emotional. It was really strange. I should have been running like a maniac screaming for help, but I didn't. I just stood there in their presence, and I took it all in while I could. From behind one of the creatures walked a small one. It walked up to and stood at the road's edge, and it looked at me. It began to fidget with its own fingers like it was nervous, like it was doing something mischievous. Soon, an adult walked in behind this smaller one and gave a shallow grunt, at which time it leaned over slightly, and the small one climbed onto the back of the mother. That is so cool. It had to be its mother. I don't know why I think it was, but it makes the most sense. They slowly walked back and crunched through the leaves into the woods, leaving me with the other 5 creatures. The only other sounds I heard them make was when a strange howl that I will never be able to replicate came from way back where my Jeep laid on its side. The others responded by moving from their statue-type poses and making slow and almost gentle grunting noises to each other before they all at the same time started moving back from whence we had all just walked. And I never saw them again. I walked another mile and I heard a car on the road ahead, then another, and then another, and I knew I was home free. I stashed my rifle in some weeds well off the highway, and I flagged down a car that stopped and gave me a ride to a gas station only a short distance down the road. I made the necessary phone calls, and I was home in bed by 1 a.m. Apparently, my father knew some people in the area, and we drove to meet them so that I could guide a man with a tractor up the sunken road to my Jeep. I just needed it tilted back on all 4 tires and pulled 100 yards or so. It was going to be easy, or so we thought. I gathered my rifle up, threw it in my dad's car, and then I jumped onto the grader the man had hitched behind his tractor, and he and I began the ride up the narrow logging road to my Jeep. I figured that it was at least 3 or 4 miles before we would see it. As we came around a slight corner in the road, I asked the man to stop. I saw my mag light laying in the road, and I retrieved it. As I walked back to jump on the grader, I looked up the road, and there was my gray Jeep sitting on all 4 tires on the level stretch of the road where the banks had receded. It was the spot where the bank leveled out, at least a mile, maybe more, from where I had tumped over. I could see drag marks as if the Jeep had not been rolled, but dragged with the transmission engaged to this spot. I know those creatures did that for me, or maybe they did it for themselves so that we would not come back. I think I was the last thing on their mind. I cranked it, and we drove home that afternoon, at which point I began telling everyone what happened to me, but you already know how that turned out. So now I have told the story to, as Cam says, my people. That's awesome. Thank you, sir, if you choose to share this one with your audience. I think they need to hear it. I know that there will always be those who say these stories are invented for the writers or the storytellers to get attention. If that is the case, how much attention will I get if you never know my name? The answer is I will get no attention. And that is why so many people write to Cam under an anonymous pretense. They're not looking for attention. They want the world to hear their stories, and they want to tell them to people who have the same in common and will not berate them their whole lives. If I hear this, Cam, I'll know that I did what I needed to do. Tell people about the most spectacular thing that has ever happened in my life. Thank you. And that's the end of the story. That's probably one of my favorite stories that I've read. I just like the guy's attitude, and I love the way that he looks at this, and I feel so bad for him. Look, I'm one of these people in my family who I have a big imagination, and I get excited about things, and I talk. And all my life, my and I don't mean this in a bad way, but my people in my family they put me off. They're like, "Oh, that's just Cam. He's just getting excited about this, or he's interested in this now, or whatever." And sometimes it kind of hurts your feelings. Now, none of it's ever been about Bigfoot, but it might be about something funny I heard or whatever. But to have something real happen to you, and then your family and your friends make fun of you 40 years after it happens, that's humiliating. I mean, the way he writes this, these people are still making fun of him all these years later, and he can't even talk about it to his family. And I just think it's a shame. I think it's a shame he has to deal with this stuff. But that's just the way it is. And what I would say is, I've always said if I see a Bigfoot, I'm just going to go crazy and tell everybody. But after reading this story, I may rethink that. I may back up, and I may stop and think and just tell selected people. And then maybe I'll come on and narrate it or tell you guys on this channel. That way I'll be telling my people, your people, all of us are our people, and we'll be able to hear another good story. But I doubt I ever see one. That's just me. I don't get that lucky. Anyway, thank you so much for this email. I thought it was wonderful, and I'm going to wind this up. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I really enjoyed putting this video together. It's been really fun reading all these stories. It's kind of long. We're in the Christmas season. Merry Christmas. Thank you for watching the video, and we'll see you guys on the next one. I really appreciate you. Thanks.